in listen-only mode.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us today for Grading with Feature Lines. My name is Lawrence Vaughn, as you can see, all things marketing. Today I'm joined with Brian Haley, our resident PE or technical specialist today. They'll be walking us through this today's webinar. Before we do get started, I do want to make sure that everyone can hear us. So as you can see on your right-hand side, your task pane, there will be a questions dialog box. Please feel free to enter your questions throughout the entire presentation. We will stop the presentation and answer them accordingly, or if it is something we do need to take offline, we will inform you that we'll take it offline and answer you at a later time. So feel free to answer as many questions as you want, and again, we'll get to them as soon as we can. For those of you that are students or of universities or colleges or whatnot, we have been approved by the state education board, so feel free to contact us if you have any information about taking some of our classes to further your education.
And Lawrence, I do believe that we are the only reseller in the area that is approved, correct?
Haley, that is correct. We are the only one, as far as we know, in the whole entire United States.
Oh, wow, excellent. Before we move on, one thing I do want to point out, and we always like to point this out on all of our webinars, anytime we talk with our customers, is February. In February, if your software is not on subscription, you will not be able to upgrade it to the newer version. So if you have old versions of old licenses sitting around that eventually you want to be able to use and put them on the current version, if they're not on subscription come February 2015, you will not be able to do that. You'll lose all value that those licenses hold. So that's something you definitely want to think about as we go forward. And you know what? I'm not showing my screen yet. It would help if I was actually showing my screen here. I was looking over at Lawrence's screen. I'm like, how come his is different than mine?
So as we were mentioned earlier, this is the dialog box that you would answer questions. Information about the Student Industry Toolkit.
Yep.
And then these are a list of upcoming classes. We do our first class coming up here, CAD to GIS, all the way to Civil 3D Styles class. So a lot of these classes are the extensions, the one-day Civil 3D class, and then fundamentals and surveys and infrastructures, and CAD to GIS are a little bit longer, 3 to 4 day classes. We have offer these classes just about every month. They fill up consistently, so definitely get a chance to take some time off to get a class. Right now is a great time to do so.
And they say there's two best times to take a class, to get training, when you have the time and when you have the money. And in this industry, those two times never seem to coincide. So, yeah. And I do want to point out that those bottom four, those one-day classes, this is kind of our answer to the advanced Civil 3D class. People always ask, do we have an advanced Civil 3D class? And the problem with an advanced Civil 3D class is, well, John wants to learn about his stuff, and Joe wants to learn about his stuff, and Sally wants to learn about her stuff, and you don't want to have to sit through everybody else's stuff that they want to learn. So that's why we've kind of created these one-day classes.
All right, well, with that said, I'll give Brian the floor. Brian?
All right. Thanks, Lawrence. So today we're going to be talking about grading with feature lines. Now, prior to talking about grading with feature lines, we really need to talk about sites. So a site in Civil 3D, right? So everybody knows what a site is. You go out and you do site grading and site visits and all that stuff. So what is a site in Civil 3D? So that's going to be the first thing we need to talk about. And in my opinion, this is probably the most important thing you'll learn about today. If you don't pay attention to the rest of the webinar, pay attention while I'm talking about sites. The next thing we're going to talk about is how to go about creating feature lines. So I want to create some feature lines, and how do I go about doing that? What are some techniques to create feature lines? We're going to take those feature lines and add them to a surface. Now, when you're using feature lines for grading, you're going to be adding them to a surface as break lines. I'm not going to be talking about what a break line is, but what I am going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the settings that you can apply as you're adding feature lines to a surface as break lines. And then we need to get into editing feature lines. And I know some folks think this is kind of a backwards way of doing it. You add the feature lines to the surface and then you edit them. But remember, this is Civil 3D. We've got a whole new way of doing things in Civil 3D. So, how about we get to it? So, like I said before, the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of the site. So, a site. All right, sites. Everybody knows what a site is. But in Civil 3D, I want you guys to take this away. A site is not a site. If you haven't actually investigated what a Civil 3D site is, whatever you think a site is in Civil 3D, that's not what it is. It's not. So what do most people that are doing civil engineering think of when they hear the term site? Well, they think of something like this. Right? Everything within the property boundary is in my site. Right? We send the surveyors out to do a site visit. Or to do a site survey. The engineers go do a site visit. This particular commercial project is going to be creating a whole bunch of extra traffic, and we need to go improve that intersection over there. What's that? Well, that's an off-site improvement. So when we think, as engineers, about sites, we think location. Where is the project? In Civil 3D, a site has absolutely nothing to do with location. This is not a site in Civil 3D. So what on earth is a site in Civil 3D? Well, technically, a site is a topology. Ooh, there's a good word for you. A topology. What on earth is a topology? Well, I looked it up on Google, just like everybody does for everything, right? And as you can see here, a topology is the study of geometric properties and spatial relations unaffected by the continuous change in what? Well, let's look at that second one. The way in which constituent parts are interrelated or arranged. So, how are these things interrelated? So basically what a site is, it's a bunch of things that interrelate with those other things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of walk you through my process of learning what a site is. All right, so let me shift over to Civil 3D here real quick. This isn't going to be all PowerPoint, I promise. All right, so as I was learning Civil 3D, I had the misconception of what a site is. And well, I got a project, and I wanted to start learning Civil 3D, so I decided to use this project. And the first thing I had to do was create an alignment. So I just come in here, and I'm going to create an alignment that represents my roads. Oh, it's going to ask me for a site. All right, so back then, alignments had to be in a site. They don't now. But so I created a site, and I give it the name of the project, right? Because everything within the limits is going to be a part of this site, right? So I come through here, and I create my alignment. Let me go ahead and create an alignment real quick. Something like that. All right, and there's my alignment. Well, my project has more than one road, so let me go create another alignment. It's in the same location, so it must be in the same site. All right, so I'm going to give it, put it in the same site here. Create another alignment, and there's my roads, and what on earth is that thing? Where did that come from? Well, yeah, that's a parcel. So if I grab that label, you can see it's a parcel. Why is there a parcel there? I didn't create any parcels. All I did was create two alignments. Well, real quick, parcels in Civil 3D cannot be created. They cannot be edited, and they cannot be deleted. All right, so if I grab this parcel and I hit delete, it's not going to be deleted. If I explode it, I'll get extra lines in the drawing, but the parcel is going to remain. A parcel is a defined object that is defined when parcel segments enclose an area. You can edit parcel segments, delete parcel segments, create parcel segments, and those things are used to define my parcel. Now, if I don't want, so when I put these alignments in a site, they act as parcel segments, and so we get this interaction. So this is a quick demonstration. Let me go ahead and do this again. All right? Let me go ahead and create another new drawing here real quick. And this time, I'm going to create a couple of feature lines. And I'm just going to use polylines to start off with. I'm going to take these polylines and I'm going to make them into feature lines. So I'll create the feature lines from objects. Now, Another thing I want you to take away from this is you should never, under any circumstances, ever use Site 1. Why? Well, it's because it's the default site. It's like that drawing on layer 0. Right? You should never, in your drawing, draw on layer 0. Why? Well, because then you don't know what that stuff is. Alright, so in this example, I'm going to use Site 1. Okay, I take that back. The only time you should ever use Site 1 is when you're demonstrating why you should never use Site 1. Alright, so I'm going to put it in Site 1. I'm going to take this feature line, I'm going to raise it up in the air just a wee little bit, and I'll go ahead and split my view here. So over here on the left, I've got my plan view. Over here on the right, I'm going to pull this off into a 3D view. So you can see these two feature lines are definitely at different elevations here. And if I take this feature line and I grip edit it so it crosses over this other feature line, as soon as I'm done editing, you'll see that happen. So what's happening here? Well, these two feature lines are in the same site. So anytime objects within the same site intersect each other, they have to have the same elevation. These two feature lines are in the same site. Where they cross, they have to have the same elevation. Now, why did the bottom one jump up to the top one? Well, it's because the top one was the last one edited. So if I take this bottom one and I grip edit it so it goes right smack back down on itself, you'll see the top one jumps down to the bottom one. So, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Well, if you don't know this is happening, this could be really, really bad. But if you know this happens, this is a very powerful tool here. So when I have two feature lines that I'm going to be adding to the same surface, I want them to have the same elevations where they cross each other, because that's one of the limitations of a surface. And again, last one edited wins the battle. Alright, so Sally the engineer has gone through here and she's done all the grading. And now Steve the surveyor, he needs to come in and start doing some parcel work. So he's going to come in here and he's just going to, I don't know, draw a nice little rectangle in here that represents the easement that he's trying to define. And he'll go take that line work and make it into parcel segments. So I'll choose create parcel from objects, I'll grab the polyline, and it's going to ask me what site should it go into. Oh, I don't know, I'm just going to use Site 1. Why not? It's the default. And as you can see over there on the right, when the parcel segments intersect the feature lines, they always are going to have the same elevation because they're in the same site. Over here in the plan view, I don't see any of that. So the surveyor came in and froze the surface, froze all the feature lines because he didn't care about that sort of stuff. And it inadvertently just messed up all of Sally's grading. Now surveyor Steve is going to come in here and put some labels in here. So I'm just going to add some labels to this parcel. So I'll choose parcel, multiple segments. All right, go ahead and add that in. So I just do some bearing distances over here. And as you can see, because this was a rectangle, right, I got a beautiful 96.78 feet. And as you can see at the top, I got 96.78 feet as well. Right, over here on the right, I got 512.53 feet. And over here on the left, I've got 400. What on earth is going on here? Well, those parcel segments are interacting with the feature lines. So these labels are only showing me the distance from here to here, and likewise from here to here. So as I take this label and I actually move it across to the other side of this feature line, this is pretty crazy stuff going on here. You can actually watch that distance value change as it crosses that area. So what should I have done? Well, I shouldn't have put these things in the same site. Oh, and by the way, again, the same concept rules. Last one edited wins. How's that for a parcel? Isn't that beautiful? Oh, I love that. So what should I have done? Well, I shouldn't have put these things in the same topology. So I'm going to take these two feature lines here, and I'm simply going to move them to a different site. So I'll choose Move to Site. Now, whenever you're dealing with sites, you always want to make sure you use decent named things. So Site 1 means nothing to me. So I'm going to call this one Northwest Lots Grading. So these are the feature lines that are going to be used to grade the Northwest lots, or something along those lines, so that when the surveyor Steve comes in and sees a site called Northwest Lots Grading, he knows not to use that for his parcel work. So I'll select OK here. I'm going to move that into those lots, and now these feature lines are no longer interacting with the parcel segments. They're still interacting with each other because they are still in the same site, but they no longer interact with the parcel. So it's very, very important that you understand how sites work, especially when we're dealing with feature lines. Cannot stress that enough. All right, so that's the concept of sites. So let me switch back over here to my PowerPoint. All right, so that's the site. Those are topologies. If you have any questions on this, feel free to post them up. I got a lot to cover. Hopefully I'll be able to get to your questions, but this is going to be a tough one today. We'll see. So the next thing I want to talk about is creating feature lines. So I know feature lines were great. I love that interaction between feature lines. So if I change that feature line, this feature line changes too. How do we go about creating these things? Well, there's a couple of different methods that we can use to create them. First of all, you can just draw them. So I can go in, use the command, create feature lines, and just go through and draw them. Another thing you can do is you can take line work that's already in the drawing, and even line work that's XREF'd in, and create feature lines from those objects. Now, when do you want to use which one? If you have simple line work, if the feature line is going to be pretty simple, and you pretty much know the elevations they need to be at, you can just draw them. I'm personally not a big fan of the just draw them method unless they're really simple feature lines. Like I want a feature line that goes from here to here, and that's it. If you got complex objects or you don't know what the elevations need to be yet, you know you're going to have to come back and edit those anyways, that's when I typically use the create from objects. And personally, even with the really simple feature lines, I prefer the create from objects. It's just kind of, it seems to work better for me. There's nothing wrong with the just draw them way of doing it. You know, different people like different things. All right, so let's see a couple of ways of creating feature lines. So let me switch back over here to Civil 3D. I'll go ahead and close out of this drawing. All right, so I've got some line work in here, and I want to create feature lines. So I'm just going to use the create feature line command first. I'm eventually going to take these lines and make them into feature lines, but I'm going to start off just drawing them. So on the Home tab, again, whenever you want to create something in Civil 3D, go Home. So on the Home tab, feature lines, I'm going to use the create feature line command. It's going to ask me, what site do you want to put this in? So again, you have to make sure you've got a good understanding of sites. So I'm going to create a new site here. And I'll call this one, I'm just going to use this one as delete me, because I don't want anybody actually using it, because I know I'm going to delete it later, because I'm just coming in here doing some testing. Alright, feature lines, the name of your feature line is optional. You don't have to give it a name. You also don't have to give it a style. If you don't give a feature line a style, the display of it behaves exactly the same as a line. All right, what layer do you want it to go on? And if you're converting line work, you're going to have some conversion options down here. We're not converting anything, so these are all grayed out. So I'll select OK, and it's going to ask me to pick my first point. So I select my first point, and now it's going to ask me for the elevation of it. This is why I'm not a big fan of this command, because most of the time as I'm creating feature lines, I don't know what the elevations need to be yet. But if I knew what it was, then I can just type it in. So I want to give it an elevation of, say, 100. Now it's going to ask me for the next point. All right, so let's pick the next point. And now it's going to ask me for the slope. So I want to go from there up 2% to this location, down at 3 to 1 to that location. Or I've got many different command line options. So I could do a difference, I could go to a specific elevation, I could get the elevation from a surface, or if I wanted to kind of do a constant slope between a whole bunch of points, I can use a transition. So I'm just going to say, hey, I want to go at 2%, so I type 2, and did something wrong. Here, let me try this again. I got it. All right, so I'll create my feature lines, pick my first point, elevation of 100, I pick my next point. I'm going to do a grade of 2%. I've got layers turned off. That's what's going on here. Pick my next point, and I'm going to go down at, say, 10%. So let me go ahead and turn some layers on here. There it is. There's my other one that I created earlier. And now if I just do, let's say, for example, an ID, at the end here, you can see this endpoint is an elevation 100. Alright, this one is at an elevation of 105.2096. I didn't have to calculate that, I just knew it was going up at 2%. And then likewise down here, it's going to be at an elevation of 80. Actually, let me change my layer state here real quick. There we go. That's what I should have done originally. Alright, so I've got this line work in here. I've already got the lines that I then want to make into feature lines. What can we create feature lines from? Well, let's find out. So we'll choose feature lines, create feature line from objects. Down here is showing me all the different things that I can create feature lines from. I can do it from lines, arcs, polylines, or 3D polylines. So a question came in earlier, survey feature line to a feature line. There is no option to create a feature line from a survey feature. Typically, survey features are static. Feature lines are geared more towards the dynamic grading type of a thing. So you can still use survey features as break lines in a surface, but there's no way to convert them to feature lines because typically we don't do that. The only way that I know of to do that would be to take the feature line, explode it, make it into a 3D polyline, and then convert that back to, and then into a feature line. Alright. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to grab my feature line. So I got this polyline out here. This represents my right-of-way. Right? This is where I'm tying into the grading that's already out there. So I'm going to put it in the correct site. So I've got one in here called overall grading already. I can give it a name. I'm personally not a big fan of naming feature lines. I don't name polylines either. There's nothing wrong with naming feature lines. In my opinion, it's just one more thing you have to manage. Alright, so I'm just not going to name it. Style. Yeah, I'm going to give it a style. I'm going to use this right-of-way style that I created earlier. I'm going to erase the existing entities, and I'm going to assign elevations to them because, well, I don't want that polyline left over. The only reason I created the polyline was to create the feature line. So I'll select OK. It's then going to ask me, what elevation do you want to assign to this? So I got a couple of options. I can assign an elevation. So I know this needs to be level at this elevation. I can simply do that. I can do it from a surface. So in this case, I want to tie into the roadway grading, so I'm going to use the corridor surface. And then there's an option here to insert intermediate grade breakpoints. Basically, if you toggle this on, your feature line is going to follow exactly along your surface. If you leave this unchecked, it's simply going to take the vertices and project them up to the surface. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and toggle that on just so we can see what's going to happen. And now I have a feature line here. And you can see all those little circular grips. Right? I've got a whole bunch of them right here. That's where this feature line crossed the triangle of the original surface that we're getting the elevations from. All right, let me repeat the process here. I'll do this for the lot lines now. I'll just grab all my lot lines. Again, feature line, create feature lines from objects. I'm going to put it in the same site because if the elevation of my right-of-way changes, I want my lot lines to change. Give them a different style, so I'll use a lot line style here. I am going to erase the existing entities, and I am going to assign elevations. This time, I'm not going to toggle on the insert intermediate grade breakpoints. Right? This feature line out here is at the correct elevation. It's tying into the roadway design, but I'm just going to assign an elevation from that surface just to get these ones up in the vicinity of the project. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that, select OK, and now these red lines here are feature lines. And then likewise, I would do it with anything else that I needed to be feature lines. So those are the two methods that we have for creating feature lines. All right. Have any more questions yet, Lawrence?
No, not this time. But again, please type in on the right-hand task pane there questions, and we will answer them. Actually, one just came in.
Oh.
What does the feature line style do for you?
Oh, that's a good question. So what does the feature line style do? Just like any other style in Civil 3D, it controls how the object looks. Right? So I created a style for this. So if you notice, this particular object is on the layer C-topo-feet-grad. Alright, so that's kind of the default layer that Civil 3D uses here, right? So that's the layer that it's on. If you notice, it's not displaying according to that layer. Instead, it's displaying according to the style. Now, let me go ahead and do that here for these lines. And what I'll do, I'll go ahead and feature lines, create feature lines from objects. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to uncheck the style. I'll select OK. Yep, that's good. So now these feature lines are no longer being displayed according to the style. They're just being displayed just like any polyline would. So if I grab this, it's on this layer C-topo feet grading. If I change the color of this layer, for example, to a nice orange, you'll see the feature lines change as well. They behave just like lines. There is some other things you can do with feature lines. The styles. So in that other example I had where the two feature lines crossed, you can actually control which one wins based off of the style. Now, in my opinion, you should never do that. Anytime you have feature lines crossed, you should always put a vertex there.
Another question came in. When you use feature line styles, doesn't it give some kind of priority on which feature line wins?
Yeah, and that's what I was just talking about, Joe. You typed that in just as I was talking about it. As I said before, in my opinion, it should not ever come into play because you should always have vertices whenever your feature lines cross. So if you notice, anytime, let me just grab these here, anytime these feature lines cross another feature line, you'll see I've put vertices here. This makes life so much easier. And there's no need to be ready. Sorry, Joe. You were typing it. You probably hit enter just as I started talking about it. So. Questions are good. Don't be sorry. Sorry for being sorry. Nice Joe. All right. So let's get back to the PowerPoint. All right, so now that we've got the feature lines created, what we're going to do is we're going to take the feature lines and we're now going to add them to a surface as break lines. Like I said, I'm not going to get into what break lines do. I'm going to talk more about some of the settings that you can apply as you're creating the break lines. Now, actually, let me break up real quick. A lot of people confuse break lines and feature lines. Civil 3D does not have break lines. There are no break lines in Civil 3D. It doesn't matter what object you list, you will never see an object listed as a break line. A break line is a concept. It is the surface is going to use an object as a break line in its calculations. But that object technically is not a break line. It's still a feature line. It's still a 3D polyline. It's still a whatever that thing originally was. It's just the surface is going to use it as a break line when it does its triangulation. So as we're adding feature lines to the surface, we want to make sure we go through and set our settings correctly. A few settings that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about weeding. We're going to talk about supplementing. And then we're going to talk about the famous mid-ordinate distance. And we've all seen it, but what does it do? So let's talk about these three things. Excuse me. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the weeding factors. So weeding, well, that's pulling things out, right? So if I have a break line or a feature line that has a whole bunch of vertices in it, well, sometimes it really doesn't add a whole lot to my surface accuracy to put in all those extra pieces of data. Now, typically, you'll see weeding factors and supplementing factors when you're dealing with contour data. But here's a little secret. Civil 3D, hang on just a second, I got it. All right, sorry about that. Windows thing, you know they always do that. Civil 3D treats contour data and break line data exactly the same. There is no difference in the calculations between break lines and contours. It treats contours as break lines. The only difference between adding an object to a surface as a break line versus as a contour is when you add it as a contour, those factors, those weeding and supplementing factors, aren't optional. You have to put something in there. The other difference is when you add contour data to the surface, it automatically lets you put in your minimize flat areas options. Other than that, they're treated exactly the same. So you'll typically see these for contour data, but remember, contours and break lines, well, they're the same thing. So weeding factors, what do they do? Well, I copied this right out of the help. We have two different things that we can apply for our weeding factors. We've got a length value and an angle value. So the length, basically what it does is it says, okay, I've got, these 3 vertices here. What's the length between them? So if the L1 and L2, if the sum of those two lengths is greater than my weeding factor, well, then the data here is very sparse, and nothing happens. But if L1 plus L2 is less than the weeding factor, then the data is very dense, and this point then becomes a candidate for removal. The next thing it's going to look at is the turned angle. So this is the angle that we're looking at, our turned angle. So by default, the default setting here is 4 degrees. So if this angle is greater than 4 degrees, then the data is very angular, and it's going to keep that point. But if the angle is less than whatever the weeding factor is, in this example 4 degrees, then the data is very straight. It has to meet both criteria. It has to be very dense, and it has to be very straight. If it's dense and straight, then this point really doesn't add a whole lot of information to the surface. It just adds more math that it has to calculate. And so if both of these criteria are met, so L1 plus L2 is less than the distance value, the angle here is less than the angle, the equivalent line that's going to be added to the surface will look like that. So in this case, that point probably wouldn't get weeded out because that's a pretty steep angle. But then that's how the weeding factors work. Supplementing factors, well, they kind of do the opposite. So when I'm supplementing the data, it takes a look at the length of one line segment. So L1 in this case. Is L1 greater than the supplementing distance? If it is, it's going to add additional vertices until the distance between the vertices are less than the supplementing distance. And so you can see in this case the supplementing distance, oops, let me back up, is this length here. Right? Obviously it's less than the L1 length, and so L1 is going to have additional vertices added to it. It's going to add, in this case, 2 vertices. It doesn't add one at the supplementing distance. It just makes sure that the distance evenly spaced is less than the supplementing distance. And then we get into my buddy, the mid-ordinate distance. Oh, I love the mid-ordinate distance. I always ask people in class what a mid-ordinate distance is, and I get so many head scratches, it's kind of funny. You got to think back to like 10th grade geometry when we're talking mid-ordinate distance. So what on earth is a mid-ordinate distance? Well, that's a mid-ordinate distance. All right, so the mid-ordinate distance is the distance between the midpoint of the curve and the midpoint of the chord. So this is the mid-ordinate distance. And basically what this does is it allows us to take curved break line or curved feature lines and put them into a triangle surface. So a surface is made up of triangles. Triangles have straight lines. You cannot have curves in a surface. If I have curved data, I have to approximate the curve with straight line segments, and that's where the mid-ordinate distance comes into play. So this is the mid-ordinate distance of a curve. Now when we specify a mid-ordinate distance, right, this is what's going to happen here. So it draws a series of lines along the curve so that those lines have that mid-ordinate distance. The default in Civil 3D is 1 foot. So the distance here between midpoint of the line and the midpoint of the curve is going to be 1 foot. But if you notice, there's a slight little bit left over. And so it's going to take those points and it's going to redistribute it along there so that along that curve, none of those mid-ordinate distances are going to be greater than the mid-ordinate distance that we specified. Another way to think of a mid-ordinate distance is the distance. So the mid-ordinate distance is basically how far away from your surface, the triangle, do you want your data to be? So my data is over here. My surface is over here. How far away can that be? Well, let's think about this for a bit. What are some things that we model that are close together that we might use feature lines or break lines for? Well, curb and gutter. What's the distance from the flow line of my gutter to the back of curb of my gutter? Well, in the Denver area, it's about 6 inches for vertical curb and gutter. Ooh, let's take this even a little bit further. Let's make it 2 inches from flow line to face of curb. So if my mid-ordinate distance is set to 1 foot, well, my surface, my flow line, might triangulate out behind back of curb. So that's mid-ordinate distance. Now, where would you use these? Well, let me back up to here real quick. All right, so the weeding factors. Where would I use weeding factors? We use weeding factors when you've got really dense data. All right, maybe I extracted a contour out of a surface, and I want to add it to another surface as a break line, because that's where I'm going to be grading from or something like that. And that contour might have a ton of vertices on it. So I would weed the snot out of those. Maybe I've got a very dense contour right next to a very sparse contour. So I've got really dense data next to really sparse data. So I'd weed the dense data and I'd supplement the sparse data to try to get more of a homogeneous density on the surface data. And the mid-ordinate distance, well, you always have to specify mid-ordinate distance anytime you add data to a surface, because if it has curves, it has to know how to approximate that curve with straight line segments. So let's see this here real quick. Let me go into my demo. All right, so I've got feature lines here, and I'm going to take these feature lines and I'm going to add them now to my surface as break lines. Actually, before I do that, let me do this. I've been doing this in class a bit. Let me draw. How much time do I have? Okay, good. I'm doing good. I'm going to draw a couple of arcs here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that mid-ordinate distance. Actually, hold that thought. I'll do that later. So the mid-ordinate distance, I got distracted. All right, so let me talk a little bit more about a good value for the mid-ordinate distance. So as I was saying before, if my mid-ordinate distance is set to 1 foot, and I have data that's 2 inches apart, my flow line could triangulate behind the back of curb, right? So we got to keep that in mind. So how do I calculate what my mid-ordinate distance needs to be? Well, let me get in here and start adding these. So if you have feature lines and you want to add them to a surface, all you have to do is grab the feature lines, right-click, and say, hey, I want to add these to a surface as break lines. It's also up here on the ribbon as well if you prefer to use the ribbon. I kind of bounce back and forth between them. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab them all. So I've grabbed all my feature lines, and then I'll choose Add to Surface as break lines. Now in this case, I don't have a surface yet that I want to add these to, so I'll just go create a new surface real quick. Right, I'll call this one Proposed or whatever you want to call it. Select OK, and now it brings up that dialog box that we were talking about, the Add Feature Lines. All right, and here's the weeding factors, and here's the supplementing factors. Now, if I was doing this for contours, I wouldn't have the checkboxes here. Those would just be on automatically. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave those unchecked. But if you notice, mid-ordinate distance is always on. So what's a good value for the mid-ordinate distance? So what I like to do to calculate my mid-ordinate distance is I'll figure out what that smallest gap is. Flow line to top of curb, 2 inches. I don't want my flow line to pass behind my top of curb, so I'm going to take that mid-ordinate, that distance between those, and I'll cut it in half. All right, so instead of 2 inches, I'll use 1 inch. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put in 1 inch. Let's see. So 1 divided by 12, carry the pi, square root of 3i. It really doesn't matter. I don't have to do that math conversion. Anytime you're in a dialog box and you see a unit, you can type in a different unit. And yes, I do know it's 0.083333 feet. So I'm going to come in here and I'm simply going to type in 1 inch. Now I'm just going to hit tab to go to the next field, and you see it does the conversion for me. You know, say for example it needed to be 29 millimeters. So I can come in here and I can type 29 millimeters, hit tab, and again it converts it for me. So 1 inch is 0.0833333 feet. So my go-to mid-ordinate distance is 1/10 of a foot. That's what I like to use for my mid-ordinate distance. Personally, I would never go any bigger than 1/10 of a foot. I might go smaller than 1/10 of a foot depending upon the data that I have. But it's pretty rare that I model anything closer than 1 inch. Right. Select OK, and it takes those feature lines and it adds them to my surface's break lines. So I've created the feature lines. I've now added them to my surface's break lines. I haven't done any modeling of my feature lines yet. I haven't done any elevation setting except for some basic stuff. The feature lines right now are wrong. That's okay. Because what I'm going to do next, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start editing the elevations. So I've got the feature lines created. They're added to the surface. Oh, that's a good question, Joe. So Joe asks, how can we permanently set the mid-ordinate distance to be 0.1? So if I come in here and I grab a feature line now and I choose add to surfaces break lines, let me just create another quick surface here just to have something. You'll see it remembers the last value I put in. Now, in your template, if you've not done this before, you can set this. So under your settings tab, if you right-click on Surface, so wish that was alphabetical, and edit the feature settings, I'm sorry, it's not feature setting, it's command setting. So if I expand out the command and add surface break lines, that's the command we were just in. If I right-click on it, I can edit the command settings. And under, I believe it's the data options, there's my default mid-ordinate distance. And you can see because I changed it once, it changed it here. But if I go into a different command, such as add surface contours, which can have a mid-ordinate distance as well, you can see that default mid-ordinate distance here is set to 1. So that's where I could go change it. Good question, Joe. Any more questions on break lines before we move on? All right. I'm moving on then. So now we want to get into editing feature lines. So we've got a whole ribbon dedicated to feature lines, right? These tools are great. Now, just as a tip, a lot of the tools that I'm going to show you for editing feature lines will also edit polylines, 3D polylines and 2D polylines as well. So we got kind of two sections of the editing feature lines. We have the edit geometry. So this is more getting into horizontal edits. All right, so I want to break a feature line. I want to add a new point of intersection, a PI to a feature line rather. I want to reverse the direction, break it, join it, fillet it, all sorts of fun stuff. I can offset it as well. We also have elevation tools. So elevation tools, I can insert an elevation point. So an elevation point is kind of like a vertex that you can't do a horizontal bend at. It'll only do a vertical bend. I can get elevations from a surface. I can raise and lower it. I can set slopes. And my favorite of them all is the quick elevation edit. I love this command. I'm gonna be showing this one. This command is sweet. If you're not familiar with the quick elevation edit, I highly recommend that you check it out sometime. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close this drawing. I've got another drawing here that's already got feature lines created. I put some labels in here on the surface so that we can see some reactions here. And now I'm going to come in here and start editing elevations. So basically what I want is I want a 2% slope going from my back lot line to the street for the subdivision. From the back lot line to the street. From the back lot line to the street. And that's what I need. I need a minimum 2% slope, and I need to make sure that it's flowing towards the street. The whole lot is flowing towards the street. So in this case, I can't do something like this. I can't put a high point here. the high point needs to be back at the lot line. So I've got this feature line. As you can see right now, it's sloping down towards the back lot. Well, I need it to slope up towards the back lot. That's where I need the high point to be. So I'm going to take this feature line and I'm going to edit it. Now there's lots of ways of editing it. You can go into your elevation editor. This basically brings up your panorama, shows you all the different vertices of it. It works. It's really good for setting things constant. So I want it all to be the same elevation or something like that. I typically don't use it. There's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't work well for me. So I'm not going to be using that one here. Instead, I'm going to be using the Quick Elevation Edit. I love this tool. I really do. All right, so I use Quick Elevation Edit. And now, as you notice, as I mouse around my project, you can see you get these little arrows on all and triangles and things. And there we go. So these labels are set up very uniquely. So in this particular project, I need a minimum 2% slope. If you notice, the red labels are less than 2%. The green labels are 2% or greater. This is a style that I created specifically for this data set, so these don't come with the project. If you want these, email me. I'm willing to bet I can get it to you. So I want this to go up 2%. If you notice my little tooltip here, depending upon which side of the line I'm on, I'll get a positive or a negative slope. All right, so if I'm pointing on this side, you can see right now this feature line is going down 0.7% that direction. All right, if I mouse onto this side, you can see the little arrow flipped. It's now going up 0.7% in this direction. Well, I want to change the elevation of that one. The road elevation is fine. So I get in here, I make sure this arrow is pointing at the vertex I want to change, and then I simply left-click. It's now going to ask, what elevation do you want, or what grade do you want this to be? Well, I want this to be 2%, so I type in 2, and enter, and my surface changes. Love that! All right. What else changed? Well, the labels changed because they're labeling the surface. Right? You can see it's green now, it's 2% or greater. And the other thing that changed, when I changed this feature line crossed it. And so the elevation of this feature line changed as I changed the elevation of this one, because they're in the same site. They're in that same topology. And then I can just continue to do this. So I'm going to, oops. I want to continue up 2% again. And there we go. Let me do the same thing over here. Up 2%, up 2%. You can see how quickly I can start grading this lot out. I'll go up 2%, up 2%, up 2%, and I'm doing pretty good here. Now in this area, you know, I got this swale here. This is basically going to be the backyard swale. And what I want is I want a high point on here. I want the water to flow around the house to the lot lines and then up the lot lines to the street. So I need to locate the high point in here somewhere. 2% up, 2% up, it's got to be in here somewhere. So I'm going to use another tool. I'm going to use the set slope, all right, insert high-low elevation point. This is pretty cool. So I'll run this command. Basically what it's going to do is it's going to calculate that high point for me. All right, so I select this point. That's the start point. This is where I want to grade 2 down here at this point down here, right? So I click there. It's now going to ask me if I grade ahead. So starting here, going that direction, I want to go up 2%. So I type 2. And then here, going back, again, I want to go up 2%. So I type 2. And it calculates where that high point needs to be. So as soon as I end the command, you can see they all update. Now this label is showing 6%, 0.6%, because this label is actually showing the slope across here. Now if I get rid of that and then relabel this surface real quick. Oop. Oh, that's right. I can add labels, slope. I'll do a 2-point label. I'll go there to there, and there to there. And you can see that is indeed a 2% slope. All right, so I had a question. How do I get the elevation and slope labels to show up? They're just surface labels. So these labels are simply surface labels. Yeah, you actually saw me just do it. So you can add labels however you want. So annotate, add labels, and I simply labeled the surface with the labels here. All right, so I used slope labels and I used spot elevation labels. They're dynamic, so when the surface changes, the labels change. You can label feature lines as well, but I've had some oddities with that. So
another question came in after that. Did that add HP command add a pi or eval point?
All right, so the question is that command that I just ran, did it
Elevation point.
all right, did it insert a PI, a point of intersection, or did it add an elevation point? So if I grab this, you can see it actually put in a little circular grip, so it is indeed an elevation point. It's not a PI. If I grab that grip, I can't move it off the feature line. I can move it along the feature line, and I want the high point to be over here instead. No, I want it to be over here. I can move it along the feature line, but I can't move it off it. If I edit this grip over here, you'll see it's still on the line. So let me go ahead and undo that real quick. There we go. And so those are some of the tools. All right, that's a good question, Jennifer. Can I convert an elevation point to a PI? All right, so for whatever reason, this isn't a very good example of where I would want to do that, but let's say you had reason to do it. I'm not saying there is no reason. I just can't think of one off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are reasons to do that. I actually want to be able to make that into a bend. I've never actually tried it before. There's no command that will do it, but I have other tools. I can insert a PI. And I'm going to try this. I've never tried it before, so if my computer starts smoking or something like that, that's why. But I'm pretty sure this will work. I'm simply going to use the insert PI command, and I'm going to snap to that elevation point. So I'm just snapping endpoint to that elevation point, and nope, that didn't work. Bummer. I was really hoping that was going to work. I don't know of any other way to do it. Yeah, I agree. Too bad I can't say that on the air, though. All right. So, just out of curiosity, Jennifer, when would you see yourself using that? I'm always learning, trying to figure out new reasons people use the software. So, maybe type in a sentence or two. I would appreciate it personally. If I needed to make that into a, there's other things. Yeah. So, Chris mentions I could break the feature line and then join them. So that might work. So I can use the. That's the trim, that's the join, there's the break command. All right, so I'll go ahead and break it. Select an object to break. All right, so I'll grab the feature line. It's going to ask where do I want to break it, so I'm going to use my first point. And turn that off. All right, so I'll snap to the end point there. Oops, see, I forgot to, let me try that again. All right, so I'll do break, grab the object. I'm going to use the first point. So it asks me to specify the first point, so I snap to there. And then I'll snap to the same point as my second point. And now it's broken at the PI. And then I can use another tool to join them back together. And now it's there. And by the way, these are still a part of the surface, which is cool. Yeah. I agree. It would be nice. Like I said, it's not something I've ever, honestly, Jennifer, in all the years I've been teaching this, you're the first person that's asked about it. So it's not something we typically see. But yeah, I can definitely see why people would want to be able to use that. All right. So there we go. Some of the other tools that we have. I can create what's known as a stepped offset. This command's pretty cool. I want to create a stepped offset, so wait a minute. I want to grab that feature line. Oh, I grabbed the surface again. The surface is actually showing a border, and the border is actually on top of the feature line I want to grab. This happens all the time in CAD, right? What do? We grab it, we right-click, display order, send to back, or type it, or whatever you want. In this case, I'm going to show you a cool little tip. So as I mouse over, actually I've got my highlighting turned off for some reason. But if I do hold mouse over something, I do a shift space, I can then grab the thing that's underneath it. Just hold down the shift key, tap the space key, and it'll cycle you through all your different options. I've got the highlighting turned off, but I'm just going to draw it to the back so it makes it easier to grab. So I want to create a new feature line offset from here, so I can use the stepped offset command. I use this one a lot. So I just run the stepped offset command. It's going to ask me for a distance. So let's say, for example, this was a top back of curb. I want to create my curbing gutter now. So I'm going to specify the offset distance. I want to offset 4 inches. 4 inches. So that's 4/12ths of a foot. Side to offset, I want to offset out this way. And the elevation difference, it's going to be level, so I'll put it in 0. Alright, and so you can see it creates the new feature line for me. I then want to do my flow line, so I'll do the same thing. Select an object to offset, select the side. But what's going to happen is it's going to use that same offset distance. So I'll just cancel out of that, hit enter to repeat the command. Offset distance, in this case, is going to be 2/12, 2 inches. Select the object. Side, elevation difference, I'm going to go down 1/2 foot. There's my flow line, and then I'll repeat the process one more time. I'm going to offset 2 feet to my edge of asphalt. Select the object, the side, the elevation difference is going to be 2 inches, so 2/12ths. And now I can take these new feature lines and add them to my surface as break lines. Now in this case I have a border, so I might have to do a little something here. Alright, again, always set that mid-ordinate distance to 0.1. And let me go ahead and remove the border from my surface, because things might get a little weird if I don't. Or the boundary, rather. And if I take this into my object viewer now, you can see I got a nice little curbing gutter running around my project now. Alright, so that's all we had today. Do we have any final questions, Lawrence?
No, but if anyone does have a final question, please type it in on your task pane, and if it's something we do need to answer later, we will be sure to go and reach out to you. And with that said, we do post most of our webinars on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. It's CAD-1 without the hyphen webinars. We have several postings up there right now, so be sure to become a subscriber and you get notified whenever we do post our current webinars as we are right now. We did have a question that came in about alignments to feature lines.
Alignments to feature lines. So there's no way to convert an alignment to a feature line, but there are tools that you can run to create feature lines from an alignment. So let me just jump back to Civil 3D here real quick. I'm not going to demo this one, but I'll show you where it is. So there is the create feature lines from alignment. And if you have a profile for your alignment, you can assign those elevations to the feature line as you create it.
Another question coming in. A few questions here. Can steep offset lines be linked together as in curb? If the top elevation changes, it dynamically adjusts the gutter grade.
Yeah, so right now, feature lines can't be linked to other feature lines unless you create a grading. So if you use the grading tools in Civil 3D, you can do that. Unfortunately, in this example, I just use feature lines. If I change one, I'd have to go change the other ones. There are some pretty nice tools, especially for example, curbing gutter. There is the adjacent elevations by reference command. So if I change one of those lines and I want to update the other ones, this is the tool I would use to do that. All right. Let's go ahead and call it a day. It is our hour is up, so thank you everybody for coming and seeing us. We are online, so I should probably put the webinars link up here as well. That would be a good thing for me to put up here. So yeah, so thank you everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.